Daf Tzadi Beis, Amid Beis, Amid Aleph 92a, and we are just after the Mishnah. The Mishnah told us if you had a larger roof that opens to a smaller roof, so the larger roof would have a wall between the larger and smaller area, just on account of that it is wider, and so the fourth wall would be there in what the Gemara calls gifufi, the small walls that are between that are on the side of the opening to the smaller area, and the same would be in a courtyard that is wider than that is one courtyard is wider than the other, and so besides for the opening, the larger courtyard would have some wall, which would give it a complete four walls, and as long as the opening is 10 amos or less, and so you're going to have a valid opening, and so it's like a doorway to the larger one. But from the perspective of the smaller courtyard, or from the perspective of the smaller roof, you actually have a completely open fourth wall, and so it doesn't have any fourth wall. And so, as our Mishnah told us, in these cases, we're going to say that the larger area, whether the larger roof or the larger courtyard, those are going to count as completely enclosed, and they can carry within there. And the smaller area, which has a completely open fourth wall, cannot count as open. As enclosed. It's because it's completely open. So the Gemara says, why do we need both teachings, by the roof and the courtyard? So according to Rav, who had told us earlier that we don't say that it's good asik mechitzta, that there is no, since you cannot tell the wall between the two, that there's a wall between the two structures below, between the smaller and larger wall, a roof, and so the wall doesn't go up. We don't have a good asik mechitzta. So according to Rav, in order to have a good asik mechitzta, that the wall completely goes up, we're going to have to be able to see the wall from the roof. And so if you have an overhang, you can't see the wall. Between the two structures, you cannot see the wall. So dumya de chatzar. So therefore, it has to be similar to the courtyard. Machatza minkara mechitzta. Just as in the courtyard, the walls are clearly visible because it's actually walls that are there. Afgag minkara mechitzta. Nami minkara mechitzta. The roof will also have to have walls that are recognizable, meaning that the outer walls have to be seen, and you can't have an overhang from the roof, because if you do, then you will not see the wall, and it doesn't count as vertical walls, and then the roof is not enclosed at all.
But that's going according to that's going according to the idea that it's not oil lerakia.
Sorry,
the mechitza goes up is oil lerakia, right?
The rishus hayachid, you mean?
No, I'm saying the mechitza itself, the wall itself goes.
That's called good asik. That
so we're going according to
and raise the wall, but you can only do that if you can see the wall, according to Rav. But if you have an overhang, that would block the wall from going up.
Okay.
Yeah. The overhang would block that. Well, Shmuel, and according to Shmuel, that says that you don't have to see the wall below; that it break through whatever roof is there, and vertically and virtually we have this wall coming up, and the outer wall and the wall between the two properties goes up. So really, according to Shmuel, even the smaller area is completely enclosed, because the wall below is going to count as a virtual wall that comes up. We say good asik mechitzta. The wall comes up and stretches between the smaller roof and the wider roof. So why does it count as if there's no fourth wall enclosure? Gag dumei de chatzar. must be talking about that the roof is similar to the courtyard. Machotza the kadarsi larabim, just as in a courtyard, people are constantly walking between the larger and smaller courtyard. Afgagnami the kadarsi larabim, people are constantly walking between the larger and smaller roof. And therefore, that would negate the virtual wall. You can't have a virtual wall if people are trampling it. And as we saw earlier. So therefore, in this case, the smaller courtyard does not have, the smaller roof does not have a fourth wall, the virtual wall that's coming up from the wall between the two structures, the good asik mechitzta stretching up the wall. We can't say that because people are walking through there. But indeed, if people were not regularly walking from the small roof to the big roof or vice versa, then indeed that would count as a separate wall, and both the smaller roof and the larger roof would count as being completely enclosed. Yosef Rabba v'Rav Zera v'Rabba Bar Rav Chanan v'Yosef Abaye Gabaye. Rabba, Rav Zera, Rabba Bar Rav Chanan, and Abaye were sitting together. V'Yasvi Ka'amri, and the first three were sitting and talking, and they said, Shema Mina, from our Mishnah we learn, Mimasnitin, D'Yure Gedola Bekatana, that the inhabitants of or the living space of the larger one includes the smaller one, the smaller roof or the smaller courtyard. But the dwelling or the living space of the smaller one does not include the larger space. In other words, the smaller space is absorbed within and connected to the larger space, but the larger space does not become automatically absorbed and connected to the smaller space. Ketzad. And in what halachic ramifications would this idea have? The halacha is that if you have a vineyard, you can't have mixed seeds, so you can't grow vegetables, wheat, etc., in between the vines, and also within 4 amos of the end of your vineyard, or within the same confined space as your vineyard. So the halacha is going to, however, if you have a border, if you have a wall, then they could be within an inch of each other, as long as you actually have a above ground barrier. So this would become relevant in our space here, because if you have a proper, if the wall counts as a proper wall, so then you can plant in so if you have the larger area over here, which is enclosed and has vines, and since the smaller area is included in the larger area, because the smaller area does not have a barrier from the larger area, so you cannot plant any wheat or other vegetables within that smaller area because it's considered enclosed together with it. However, if it was the other way around, that you had the smaller area has the vines, and you want, and the larger area is considered like it has a fourth wall, so there it can be completely enclosed. The vine, it's as if the vines have a wall between the vines and the larger area, and so you're allowed to plant right up to the vineyard. So Ketzad, Gefana Begedola, if you have the vines in the larger area, Asil Israel Katana, you're not allowed to plant in the smaller area because that's a part of the larger area. However, V'im Zora, and if you did, it's going to be prohibited. All the grain, all the wheat, let's say, that you planted there. Now we go to Tzadei Beis Amud Beis. However, Gefana Mutarim, but the vines are going to be permissible. However, it's the other way around, where you have Gefana Bekatana, the smaller area has the vines. Mutal Israel, you're allowed to go ahead and plant up to that wall because it counts like you have a fourth wall on the fourth side between the plants and the vines. And not only are you allowed to do that, but they will both be permissible, because since this came after the vines were already there, even the plant, and it was permissible to grow it. So even if the plants remain there and they grow right near each other, they're going to be permissible. The second halacha that this would apply to is where the halacha is that in order for a divorce to be effected, a get has to be handed into the possession of from the husband to the wife, and when she receives that in her possession, whether in her hand or in her property, and she acquires that get document, she's now released and divorced from that marriage. So Rashi's scenario here is that she owns both the larger and smaller property. However, she is in one place and the get is in the other. So if she's in the larger area and the get is in the smaller area, so since the smaller area is absorbed in a part of the larger area, so the get is in her possession. However, if it's vice versa, she's in the smaller area and the get was placed in the larger area, she and the get are not in the same possession, not in the same domain, because she cannot bring the larger area, which now essentially has 4 walls, into her smaller area, so the get is not in her possession. Isha begedola beget bekatanim is gareshes. If she's in the larger area and the woman and the get is in the smaller area, the divorce is affected. Isha bekatana beget begedola. However, if the woman is in the smaller area and the get is in the larger area, which means that the get is in a self-contained space, not in the same area that she's in, Einamis gareshes, that get would not take effect. Tessa says it's a different scenario where she borrowed one property, not the other, and she's whatever that case is. But the idea is the same. The larger area is separate from the smaller area in regards to the smaller area, but in regards to the larger area, the smaller area is connected. So the third halacha that this is relevant to is a minyan. Tzibur b'gedola. You have the larger, the community, the 9 people, the minyan being in the larger area. V'shliach tzibur b'katana, and the chazan, the shliach tzibur, is in the smaller area. Since the smaller area is connected to the larger area, is absorbed in the larger area, and that's where the minyan is. So the chazan is a part of the larger group, the 9, and it would count as a valid minyan. However, they will fulfill their obligation this way. However, it's shliach tzibur b'katana. But if the community was in the smaller area, the 9, v'shliach tzibur b'gedola, and the chazan is in the larger one, since the larger area is not absorbed and not connected to the smaller one, because the larger area has its own enclosure. So now you have the majority in the small area, and the chazan cannot be a part of them, so the chazan cannot fulfill the obligation for them and lead them in the davening. So they do not fulfill their obligation. Similarly, if you have not just a chazan, but if you have 9 in one area and 1 in the other, so if the 9 are in the larger area and 1, the 10th person is in the smaller area, mitzdarfen, that becomes connected and absorbed, and you have a valid minyan. But if you have 9 in the smaller area and 1 in the larger area, and since the large area counts as having 4 walls, it's self-contained, it does not become absorbed in the smaller area, so this 1 cannot become a part of the minyan. Ein mitzdarfen, they don't enjoy it. The next halacha is the relevance of you're not allowed to daven in a space that has human waste or animal waste, depending on its situation. So tzelya begedola, if there is waste in the larger area, asale kros kriya shema bekatana, you may not read Shema in the smaller one, because that's considered in the same area, because the smaller is absorbed into the larger. However, vice versa, if the waste is in the smaller area and the person saying the Shema is in the larger area, since the larger area is self-contained because it does have a 4th wall on that side, it will be separate, and the Shema is allowed to be said. Amalu Abaye. So Abaye said to all of these, to great conversation, but essentially what you've just said is the creation of this wall makes it worse than if there was no wall. So now this barrier that's there actually makes it worse than if it was beforehand. So what we just said was that according to this first scenario, if you had the vines in the larger area, since the smaller area is completely, it becomes absorbed into the larger area because it's completely open from the perspective of the smaller area. It's completely open to the larger area, not separated from it. And therefore, you cannot plant in any of the area of the smaller area. However, that's and the basis for that is because it has partially some walls from the larger area, but the smaller area has no walls. He says, wait, but what would be the halacha if the walls were actually flush? It was completely neither space was larger or smaller than the other. There, the halacha is all you need between the vines and your garden that you want to plant, or the wheat patch that you want to plant, would only be 4 amos. All you need is 4 amos, let's say 6 feet. You don't need any more than that. But because it's wider, and now it's considered that there is partial walls to the larger area, now you can't plant at all in the smaller area. What you're telling me is that the walls, or the partial wall to the larger area, is going to make it worse for the smaller area. If there was no wall at all, meaning they were flush and both sides were the same size, all you need is a 4 amma space, and you can plant wheat near the vines as long as 4 ammas away. And now you tell me because it's wider, it's going to be prohibited. Rabbi Zera responded to Abaye and said, is that so shocking to you that you can find an idea where there's a wall and the wall actually makes it halachically more difficult? Is that not something we find anyhow? In our Mishnah, if you have a larger courtyard, which is connected to a smaller courtyard, the larger courtyard is permissible to carry. And in the smaller courtyard, you're not allowed to carry. Because it's just like an opening to the larger area. So we say that if there was a larger courtyard and a smaller courtyard is going to be prohibited. If he would add to that and add a wall, so he would take, let's say the larger courtyard was 2 amos wider than the narrower courtyard. So he extends the wall of the narrower courtyard to cut off that extra amma on each side. And now the 2 courtyards are flush and completely the same size. That would prohibit the larger one from also carrying, because now they are completely open to each other and they didn't make an eruv with each other, so you cannot carry from either of them. So you see that adding the wall there invalidates and makes it prohibited to carry within the larger courtyard. He says, yeah, there the reason is because you didn't add a wall, you actually removed the wider wall. That's what you're doing. You had a wider wall which allowed you to carry, and you've just removed it by adding a wall into and making the courtyard narrower. You've just removed part of the outer wall, and that's why you've made it halachically more difficult. You've just removed that wall that gave the wider courtyard the extra space. So Rava further challenged Abaye and says, and we don't find such a concept where a larger where you made add a wall to a space and that would cause prohibition by itmar. But we do have such a halach in regards to sukkah, and now we're on Sadi Gimel Amid Aleph. Sichech al gabe achsadra. Somebody made a sukkah on top of an achsadra, a gazebo. So the halacha with a sukkah is you need two valid walls and a partial third wall. And that partial third wall would be valid with a schach, with a tefach, and the shape of a doorway next to it. Okay, so all you need is that tefach, and you could have that with what the Gemara calls petzimin. The width of the supporting wall, one tefach, is going to be sufficient to count as the third wall at the opening of this gazebo. So you have a tefach on the petzimin, this plank, this board, which essentially is the supporting wall of the supporting beam of that corner. Now, that's a valid sukkah. However, if you were to hang a wall on the inside of that supporting beam, and now remove that, essentially you no longer have the petzimin, you don't have a tefach of wall there. Now you only have two walls to your sukkah, and that's going to be invalid. So he added schach to the the gazebo that has a petzimin, that has this plank, which is the supporting beam. Kshera, it's a kosher sukkah. But if he made it smooth, meaning he just put a wall on the inside from the one beam to the other beam to make it flush, now there's no longer an extra tefach on the third wall. He doesn't have a wall there. Psula, it's going to be an invalid sukkah. Amalei Abaye here too. Abaye responded, "Lididi kashera." According to me, it's kosher simply because I say pi tikra yored v'sosim. I have the halachic idea that we said earlier that the support beam of the roof, which holds up the schach, is, since there is a space there, that's flush, and that's going to come down, and we're going to say you actually have a third wall as pi tikra, the mouth of the roof, meaning the side of that of the cross beam at the top. Yored v'sosim counts as a halachic wall. It comes down and encloses that space, and so we have a valid wall on account of pi tikra yored v'sosim. And according to you, lidutcha. And according to you, it actually is not. It's not that the wall is making it prohibited. The wall is removing the previous wall that's there, and that's why it's invalid. It's not invalid because the new wall is there. It's invalid because you've essentially removed the structure and function of the previous wall that was there. Silik mechitzasi. Amalei Rabbi Bar Avchana l'Abaye. Rabbi Bar Avchana said to Abaye, also we have another case where we can say that adding a structure is going to make it more prohibited. Is it not? Is it really so shocking that we find such a concept that a mechitza, adding structure, is going to remove a halachic permission, make it prohibited? Vatani we learned. Bias, if you have a garden that is covered, so you have a structure, a roof, that it covers half of the structure. The roof covers half the structure. Half is covered. And half is not covered. And you plant your vines within the area that's covered. Gefanim kan, if the vines are in the covered area, mutal izroya kan, you're allowed to plant your wheat immediately next to it. Why? Because we say that since you have the thickness of the roof over the vines, the end of that thickness of the roof is a pi tikra, is the mouth of the roof, and that comes down yored v'sosim. and it's going to come down and count as a barrier. It's as if you have a virtual wall at the end of that roof, which means that your vines are completely separate from the garden. And so you can plant right up to that wall. Ve'ilu hishves kiruya. However, if you decide to close up that roof, which essentially removes the virtual wall from the end of the roof, because there is no end of the roof anymore. You've completely enclosed it. Or vice versa, if you removed that roof and now it's all open, you cannot plant there anymore. So you see, adding a wall, in this case, by adding the roof, is going to prohibit the planting of the wheat, which prior to that would have been permissible. So he said to him, same, hasam siluk mechitzas. There too, you understand, the adding of the roof is similar to removing of the roof. And just like removing of the roof, the reason why it's going to be prohibited to plant between the wheat next to the vines is not because you've added structure. It's because you removed the wall. By removing this roof, you've removed the wall. So too, by adding roof, you've also removed the wall. And so it's not actually that you've added wall, you've just removed siluk mechitzas, you've removed the wall. Sholach le Rava la Abaye. Rava further asked the question to Abaye, but he sent it as a question biyad Rav Shammai bar Zeira, with his student Rav Shammai bar Zeira. Did we really not find this concept that adding a structure will create prohibition? Batani, we learned yesh b'mechitzas hakerem lahakil ulahachmir. A structure within the vineyard, a wall around the vineyard, can make it more lenient as well as strict in regards to planting next to it. And for this, we're going to have to remember something we learned 3 months ago at the beginning of the Masechta. The concept is that if you have a vine or a vineyard, you cannot plant wheat or seeds, zeraim, vegetables within that vineyard. You do need a 4 amma space on the outside of the vineyard, which allows for the tools to be used for the harvesting and the pruning of the vines. And then, if you have enough space next to it, so then you can plant. A minimum planting space of the zeraim, so let's say the wheat that you would plant next to it, according to the Beis Hillel, is a minimum is 4 amos, and according to Beis Shammai, a minimum is 8 amos. But any less than that doesn't count as a valid garden or a valid wheat patch, and therefore would be absorbed in the vineyard as well. However, if you have any visible structure, 10 tefachim high, barrier between your vines and your wheat, then they can come up, both of them abutting that wall straight up to the wall. Vatani, we learn, in the vineyard, there's a leniency and an astringency by having a wall. How so? Ketzad. Kerem hanatua, if you have a vineyard that is planted ad ikar mechitza, all the way up to the root, to the base of this wall. You can plant your wheat immediately on the other side of that wall, even though that they are essentially an inch from each other. That's fine, because you have a valid wall. That's the leniency, that as long as there's a structure between the vines and your wheat, you can plant your wheat and the vines within each other. If you had not had the wall, you would need at least 4 amos between them. And now, and now because you have the wall, you can be lenient and go directly an inch from the vines. And in what scenario is it strict? If you had from the wall a from the wall all the way up to your vines, all you had was 11 amma, then lo yavi zera l'sham. You cannot plant any plants there. And this is based upon that you need, for planting your wheat, you're going to need 4 amos from the wall in order to protect the wall, and 4 amos of you're going to need 4 amos of space between the vines and the planting. So if you have 11 amma, 4 amos for protecting the wall, 4 amos for the work of the vines, you're only going to have 3 amos of planting your wheat. And you need, according to Beis Hillel, minimally 4 amos of planting wheat. Otherwise, the patch doesn't count as a proper wheat patch, and it's going to be absorbed in the vineyard. And so therefore you can't plant there. However, if you did not have that wall at 11 amos from your vines, so then all you need is a 4 amos of workspace for the tools of the vines, and then you can plant. But since you have a wall there, and in order to protect the wall, you would keep the wheat 4 amos away from the wall. So you need 4 amos from the wall, 4 amos from the vines, and you need a minimum of 4 amos in between, which is a total of at least 12 amma, and you don't have that, so you can't plant at all. So you see the fact that you have a far wall at the end, within 12 amos of your vines, it prohibits you from planting entirely. So ein mechitza, if you'd not had the wall, machik dalet amos, all you need is a 4 amos space, v'zoreya, and then you can plant your wheat. V'zoi mechitza sakerim lahachmir, and so here you have a stringency, a halachic limit on account of a wall. So the leniency was that the wall allows you to bring the vines and the wheat all the way up to the wall. However, the stringency is that practically you're going to need 4 amos from the wall to keep the wall structure solid, and 4 amos from the vines in order to give it the tools and the harvesting tools and the pruning tools passage on the side of the vineyard. So you need 8 fallow amos plus the 4 amos minimally of a patch. Otherwise, it doesn't count as a patch, and that whole area becomes absorbed in the vineyard. And so you have a stringency. Having that wall limits you to not planting 4 amos away from the vineyard. Amar leil tamech. So Abaye responded, well, good question, but according to that question, you should have asked me directly from a Mishnah. You didn't have to ask me from this Brisa. You could have asked us directly from the Mishnah. The Tanan, as we learned. Karachas hakera. If you have a bald spot in the middle of the vineyard, meaning you have an empty patch in the middle of a vineyard, how much does it have to be empty that you can plant in the center of the vineyard? Because since the empty patch in the middle of the vineyard essentially makes the vineyard split into 2. So you're going to have 4 amos on either side of the vineyard for the passage of the tools that are required for the harvesting and maintaining of the vineyard. That means you need a minimum of 8 amos, 4 amos for each side of the patch. And according to Beis Hillel, you need a minimum of 4 amos of a vegetable patch or wheat patch as well for each side, so that it counts as this side of the vineyard has its needed space for the harvesting plus a vegetable patch. And if not, that whole area is going to become absorbed in the vineyard and count as a vineyard, and you can't plant in the vineyard. So in order for it to count as an independent space, it's going to need 4 amos of planting. According to Beis Hillel, according to Beis Shammai, you're going to need 8 amos of planting. So, which means, according to Beis Shammai, you're going to need 24 amos of an empty area between the 2 vineyards, and according to Beis Hillel, you're going to need 16 amma of empty patch between the vineyards, 4 on either side for the tools for the vineyard, and 4 on each side for the planting of the vegetables, which is 8 on each side, 16 total. The Tanan, as we learned, Karachas Akarim, an empty space in the middle of a vineyard. Beishame Yamim Chav Dalet Amos, you need 24 Amos. Ubeisilu Lemrim Tezayin Amma, and Ubeisilu say that you need 16 Amma. Similarly, Machol Av Kerem, if you have a vineyard and you have the vineyard is only in the center of this enclosed area, and you have the literally the encircling of it, meaning the side between the vineyard and the wall. Beishame Amrim Tezayin Amma. Beishame say you need a total of 16 Amma, again, because you need 4 Amma of space near the vineyard for its tools, 4 Amma to protect the wall, and according to Beis Shammai, you need 8 Amma of vegetable patch to count as an independent space. So that's a total of 16. Beis Hillel say no, it's sufficient with 12, but you do need 12. 4 for the tools of the vineyard, 4 for protection of the wall, and 4 amos for a minimum space of planting your vegetables, and then it would count as an independent patch from the vineyard. Any less than that, and it's a part of the vineyard, and you're not allowed to plant. And now it explains what is a karachas akarim, an empty space within a vineyard. Kerem shecharvem tzeisa, a vineyard that the middle dried out, became destroyed. So now you have an empty patch between essentially what used to be one vineyard, but are now separated by these 16 amma, and so it's going to be in 2 separate vineyards. And so you need to have the 4 ammas on either side for the tools, plus the 4 ammas of patch on either side. If you don't have a total of 16 amma, you can't plant in the middle, because otherwise you're planting within what is an absorbed space of the vineyard. It counts as vineyard space. If you had 16 amma, so you leave 4 ammas near the vineyard for the tools and the work. And then you can plant in the middle. What would count as an enclosed vineyard, meaning there's between the wall and the vineyard there's an empty space? It's the space between the vineyard and the fence. That according to Basil, if you do not have the 12 amma, again, 4 to protect the wall, 4 for the tools of the vineyard, and 4 for planting, you can't plant there. However, if you did have the 12 amma, you can leave enough for the 4 amma to protect the vineyard, and then you can plant the rest, leaving 4 to protect the wall. All right, so we have the Mishnah. Ela hasam. So over there, what's the reason? That there, the reason is because you need 4 ammas around the vineyard for the tools of the vineyard, for the work of the vineyard. So that's part of the vineyard. That's always the halacha, that you have 4 ammas for the work of the vineyard. Lagabe geder, and on the side of the wall, kivin olim is daran, since you don't plant over there because you want to protect the wall. Now, you relinquish the rights to that space because that's needed to protect the wall. You don't want to plant right near the wall and then the wall will collapse. The beini and the space in between. If you have the 4 amos, chashivan, that would count as a significant enough space to count it as an independent patch and not a part of the vineyard. But if you have less than 4 amos, then it's really not an independent space. It's absorbed within the vineyard and counts as a vineyard space. And now you have plants within a vineyard. Taking back to this Gemara, essentially what Abaya's response to all these cases is that since you have a wall, of course, generally we say a wall is not going to prohibit. Walls are there to give you more halachic space. However, there are places where the wall actually essentially removes the previous wall, or the wall is going to create new halachic prohibitions on account of you relinquishing space to protect the wall, and the vineyard space is now enclosed, and so it has to any planting in there would have to be significant enough to be independent. Otherwise, it's a part of the vineyard. Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda said, this concept of having a narrower space, which essentially gives a wall to the outer space, would also create a permission within a karpef. The halacha is, as we've seen, a karpef, which is a wood storage area, that is larger than Beis Hasayim. It's larger than 2,000. Than 100 by 50 amma, 2 seah area, which is larger than 70 by 70. The halacha is that you're not allowed to carry in there unless your space has multiple people and there are 3 or more people. So now it's a rabim space, a space that is servicing the masses, and therefore even if it's larger than Beis Hasayim, it's going to be valid. So we have 3 people in adjacent wood storage areas, in adjacent karfefs. The 2 outer karfefs being wider than the middle karfef. So it looks like an H, if you would. And because these are connected to each other, and the middle space is completely open to the 2 outer spaces, the 2 outer, the people who are in each person that's in the outer space is connected to the middle space. It counts as if you have multiple people, that you have 3 people, and therefore you're allowed to carry from one to the other, even though it is larger than Beis Hasayim. Gimel karfifa zebetzadze. The 2 outer ones are wider, and therefore they have a structural wall between a 4th wall essentially between theirs and the middle. However, but the middle one, because it's narrower, essentially only has 2 walls. The 2 outer walls are open to the other spaces. So that counts as a connection to the outer ones, and each one is connected to the center, meaning the center has 3, and therefore they're allowed to carry throughout the whole thing. And each one has an individual in them. It's like they are a caravan. It's like there are 3 or more people. And they are allowed to carry throughout the entire space. Vadai, it's true. If it's the other way around, where the middle one is wider. And since the middle one is wider, the middle one now has a 4-wall enclosure. It is independent and separate from the outer ones. So even though the outer one, each one is open completely on the 3rd wall to the center, but the center is completely enclosed. So the center one so each one of the outer ones is going to be, the center one can be connected with one of them, but they don't connect through and through. Since each one is independent in their own space, so it would only be allowed to carry throughout it if each one independently only has 2 seah space, meaning each one is no more than 70 by 70 and change. What happens if you have one in the outer, one in the center, in the 2, each of the outer ones, and 2 in the center? Do we say each one goes off to one side and now you only have 2 on either side, or do we say they're all 4 together? If the 2 of them go off to one side, you have 3. If the 2 centers go off to the other, you have 3, and so that's sufficient. And one goes off to one side, one goes to the other side. And if you're going to tell me that it's as if one goes off to each side, and so you only have 2, what about if it's the other way around? If you have 2 on the outer ones and 1 in the center? Whichever way the middle guy goes, there's 3 there. Perhaps, I don't know which way he's going to go, so he can't go. So the Gemara says, in both of these questions, we are going to be lenient. And